would stop, the targeting would stop, and India would gain its rightful place by upholding the values in the constitution. It's painful actually to see people being targeted on the basis of their religion or their faith anywhere in the world, whether it be US or India. But the Indian situation, Isaac spoke a little bit about that. You have to see, in order to understand what is happening with the religious minorities in India, and in this case, the Christians in India, you have to see what is happening to the country as a whole. It has to be seen in the context of that. As of now, fundamental freedoms are threatened. Freedom of speech, dissent, freedom of dissent. The values enshrined in our constitution, particularly the four main values of justice, equality, freedom, that is liberty, and most importantly, fraternity. These values are being threatened. And as Indians, it is our endeavor to uphold the constitution and to make sure that the founding mothers and founding fathers, the values that they cherished, we put them at the right place. Now, I've been asked to speak about mainly on the report that the Religious Liberty Commission of EFI published on the 23rd of July on the persecution of Christians in India in the first half of 2021. That report was released by the Religious Liberty Commission. It was set up, the Religious Liberty Commission was set up in 1998 to advocate for religious freedoms for everybody, not just Christians. And over the years, we have made attempts that we speak out for everybody and not just Christians. However, we've been documenting incidents of attacks on Christians, opposition of Christians since the year 1998. And since the year 2009, we have been coming up with an annual report. And for some years now, a half-yearly report as well. Now, the half-yearly report, and I'd like to show it to you on the screen, just a glimpse. And after this, I will try and send you the report on the chat box. That's the report. Are you able to see it? I hope you're able to see it. Hate and targeted violence against Christians in India. This is the half-yearly report. This year, we have collected till June 145 incidents. Now, in a nation of 1.2 billion people, 145 incidents would appear like a drop in the bucket. But here's what it is. These incidents are all verified incidents. India is a huge country. A lot of stuff happens. We don't come to know about it. The incidents that are reported to us, we are only able to verify a tiny minority. What we are able to verify, we place in the report. And we've been doing that, I said, since 1998. And every year, the incidents have been in the domain of 100 to 200 incidents. So it's just the tip of an iceberg. But from 2014 onwards, these incidents have been on a uprise. So we have breached the 325 mark. We have breached the 377 mark also. Last year, during the same period, we recorded 130 plus incidents. This year, it was 145 incidents. Now, what kind of incidents are we talking about? We are talking about physical violence. Not a day goes by when we don't hear of some corner in India of people being targeted for their faith, pastors being targeted for their faith. We are talking about church worship disruption. A church service would be going on, a prayer would be going on, and people would just barge in. They would beat up the people present. They take the pastor or whoever the leader of the prayer assembly is, and they take them to the police station and tell them this man was trying to convert everybody over there. It doesn't really matter if the people present over there are already Christians. You just have to make an allegation. And then the process of getting justice is punishment in itself. You know, the process itself can kill you. I'm just coming back from a meeting, a memorial meeting of Father Stan Swami, who was falsely accused of having Maoist links. He was taken from Ranchi to Bombay, where he was not even questioned even for one day. In the 9 months that he was there, this 84-year-old man suffered from Parkinson's. His body declined rapidly, and ultimately he died. So the process became punishment. So people are being arrested left, right, and center on charges of conversion. So the attempt is to make conversion itself a bad word, even though the Constitution of India allows it. So the church does not recognize forcible conversions or fraudulent conversions. That's an oxymoron itself, But the attempt is being made through propaganda to demonize the word conversion itself. So physical violence happens aplenty. Church worship disruptions happen aplenty. When persecution started systematically during the late 1990s, it became difficult to preach outside your church. So Christians were told, now you can sit inside your church and do whatever you want. But soon attacks started happening on churches. And now attacks have started happening in families. A couple of years ago, this was not this year or even the year before that, I think it was 3 years before. Evening 10 o'clock, a Christian mother is putting her babies to bed and praying with them just before putting them to bed. Suddenly the police comes in asking for her husband. Husband is a pastor, he's not at home. And the police tells the children and the mother, what you're doing over here is anti-national. Last year, a college-going party, a send-off party is happening, and they are celebrating the educational accomplishments of a girl who was the first one from her family to go to college. And they are organizing a send-off party for her. The police comes in, and all of a sudden, take everybody to the police station, and the charges are that you are engaging in religious conversions. So this will kind of give you an accurate description of what is happening. Now, there's a lot of social boycott happening. So physical violence, church worship disruptions, and social boycott. This is particularly happening in tribal areas where the RSS, which is the mother ideologue of the BJP, the main ideologue, advocating for Hindu nationalism. The RSS is hyperactive in tribal areas and trying to fracture the tribal society between Christian tribals and non-Christian tribals. Christians have been tribals for over 200 years and no problems existed. But now you have instances of social boycott. Christians being told you will not be able to take water out of the village well. Christians being told that you are not allowed to take food from the ration shops. Christian being told, if you don't deny your faith, there is no place for you inside the village. In fact, as I speak to you right now, there are about 25 families in Odisha living in jungles because they've been chased out of their villages. And then you have structural persecution. There is a physical side of it, and then there is the structural side of it, where laws are being used to stifle the community. So Freedom of Religion Acts, ironically, they are called that. We popularly know them as anti-conversion laws. Anti-conversion laws are being used against Christians in a major way in the 8 states where they are currently enforced. The proposal is to have a national anti-conversion law implemented. That would not be so easy. But the irony is, in states where there is no anti-conversion law present, it is deemed to be present, and Christians are being targeted. All you need to do is very simple. Just put an allegation, he or she tried to convert me, and then they'll be grappling for the rest of their life, trying to prove themselves innocent in the process, and the process becomes punishment. Now, I'd like to say just one last thing, and then I'll stop. But the biggest structural discrimination has happened against the Christian Dalits and the Muslim Dalits. That is huge. That is huge. When India got independence, our founding mothers and fathers gave certain privileges and rights to Dalits, to people who in India we call the scheduled caste people, who have been oppressed for centuries together. They got some affirmative actions as reservations in jobs, educational facilities, political seats, so on and so forth. But the first presidential order in 1950 took that away from everybody except Hindu Dalits. Over a period of time, the Sikh Dalits and the Buddhist Dalits got those rights, but the Muslim Dalits and Christian Dalits are still don't have that right. A case has been going on in the Supreme Court now for over 15 years, and the governments have not responded to anything. This is a denial of freedom of faith, bigger than China, bigger than anywhere in the world. So this is how laws are being used. The Juvenile Justice Act is being used in a way that is discriminatory against and there are many instances in which it has been used against Christian orphanages. One such case is going on right now. I don't have the time to tell you. I am hopeful that the global community would take notice of this and would speak up. Religious minorities are being targeted in India. That's a fact. It's a sad fact, but it's a fact. Our Muslim brothers and sisters face the brunt much more than we do, but we do face it too. And I hope the global community will start talking about it. I want to end with a note of hope. This pandemic has been very cruel, but in the pandemic, at least we saw people stepping up for each other. I hope that we have learned a lesson from the pandemic, that we would look after each other. We would realize that we are all Indians and we need to take care of each other. If that doesn't happen, it would be a shame. I'm hoping that fraternity would prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Lal, for your comments. And definitely, even the CPC designation is not meant to be punitive. It's meant to help our allies and friends get back to a place where minorities, especially religious minorities, can thrive. So thank you so much for your comments. Our next panelist is Reverend Peter Cook. He serves as the executive director of the New York State Council of Churches. He's a dear colleague. The council represents 7,000 congregations across the state of New York. And prior to serving on the council, Reverend Cook served as a senior minister at First Congregational Church in Burlington, Vermont, and the Plymouth Church in Framingham, Massachusetts. He was also the pastor of the St. John United Church of Christ in Illinois. Reverend Cook has a great story, a horrific story, but a great story to share on his own journeys to India. But I'm going to hand it over to him right now so he can get started.
That kind introduction, and I do indeed have a story to share with all of you about travel. In the fall of 2018, I worked with the Reverend Dr. Gideon Jebamani to plan a trip to India, and together Gideon and I recruited 10 eager travelers from Tennessee, New York, and Oregon to join us for this trip, where we would see different sites representing different religions, meet with friends in the Church of South India and the National Council of Churches, and also meet with leaders of various institutions like schools for children, a seminary, and other charities to learn more about their history and the communities they served. And our trip was to take about 2 weeks. After we obtained visas, however, we all boarded planes for the long journey. Three of us managed to get into the country. 3 of us were heavily interrogated by government immigration officials when we arrived at the airport in Chennai, and we to enter from an immigration.
Peter, we're having a little bit of hard time hearing you.
Really? Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you so much.
After we obtained our visas, we boarded planes for the long journey. While 3 of us managed to get into the country, 9 of us were heavily interrogated by government immigration officials when we arrived at the airport in Chennai, and we were not allowed to enter the country. I remember getting frowns from an agent when I said we came at the invitation of the Church of South India. Note to self, never be an immigration agent if you're going to India. And one of our participants, after an hour of intense questioning, was told directly that Christians were not welcome in India. Our names were all entered into the computer along with scans of our passports, and we were told that we would be sent home. We forfeited about $1,500 in travel costs apiece and flew back to the United States completely demoralized and traumatized. Many of our travelers who had such high hopes for a trip of a lifetime swore they would never try to go back to India, frequently commenting on the open misogyny and insensitivity of the government personnel at the airport. After I returned, I learned that Christians and other religious minorities get bounced out of Indian airports all the time, some say on a daily basis. This happened, for instance, to the presiding bishop of the ELCA, who went to the country to celebrate the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. I met several times with the Consulate General in New York. He was very nice and basically instructed me on how I could re-enter the country without incident, which I actually did do in 2019 following his instructions. He also acceded to my demand that our records were cleared out of the government's computer system, and he apologized for India, saying that the guards were wrong to say Christians were not welcome in the country. The Consulate General, however, offered 4 reasons for why we might have been bounced, offering more clarity to what the guards told us at the airport. First, India is very nervous about Christians converting people of other faiths, and especially Hindus, to the Christian faith. In many parts of the country, there are severe and vaguely worded anti-conversion laws, which, if violated, could land you in jail. Conversion is loosely defined to mean any activity, including charitable activity, like providing health care or schooling, which might lead one to have a favorable view of to convert. So given this backdrop, they don't want visitors who will be offering up attractive pictures of Christianity, which might undermine the Hindu nationalists' unconstitutional project to turn India into a state where favored status is given to Hindus. Secondly, India is very nervous about not-for-profits, including churches in the United States and other countries. That would include foreigners bringing in large amounts of cash into the country, which could be used for charities. Again, these contributions might evoke sympathies of the people towards the institutions that received it, or worse, further the conversion activities of Christians to convert Hindus, or so they say, which might destabilize the Hindu nationalist project. Third, India is very nervous about outside groups, religious minorities, and their struggle for equality and justice. One example cited to me by the spy to build a nuclear power plant in southern India.
We've lost your voice again, Peter.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. India is nervous about outside groups siding with religious minorities and Dalits in their struggles for equality and justice. The argument goes that these Dalit protesters were supported financially, politically by outside groups, And a recent example would be how Amnesty International's India affiliate was shut down and bank account frozen for their advocacy for human rights in India. And finally, the gospel message of inclusion, where in Paul's words, there's no where's the caste system, which consistently favors the wealthy and privileged and keeps Dalits and other minorities in their place, is there so that they can be economically. Before Christians say a thing, their very being is a challenge to the system. There are reasons that churches are burned and pastors are beaten for offering the gospel that is a direct counter to the domination system in India, of wealth at the top. I could go on. I have a number of recommendations about what we can do about it, but I'll just say them very briefly. One is we need to strongly urge the State Department to accept the recommendation of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom to designate India a country of particular concern. This will allow us to impose pressure on them, including maybe restricting travel of certain Indian officials to the United States until such time that they change their laws. Secondly, I think in the United States, hate our people and elected.
I'm so sorry, Reverend Cook. We keep losing your audio. I suggest that perhaps we can record your remarks separately and then include them in this recording as we rebroadcast it, perhaps, because they're extremely important. So Ajit and Mudassir, if you guys could take care of that after the hearing. I think it's absolutely important we hear from Reverend Cook, since he has been affected by this. He's a directly impacted person. I'm going to ask Sydney Cochin to come on next. She's our next panelist. She's the Government Relations and Special Projects Coordinator at the Jubilee Campaign USA, which is a nonprofit organization promoting human rights and religious liberty of ethnic and religious minorities in the most oppressive countries. Sydney is a regular participant of the India Working Group of the India International Religious Freedom Roundtable, and has aided in drafting multi-faith letters to USCIRF and the State Department promoting CPC designation for India for its egregious violations of religious freedom. Thank you, Sydney.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Henna, for the very kind introduction. Can you hear me, just to make sure?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Sydney Cochin, and I'm the Government Relations and Special Projects Coordinator at Jubilee Campaign. First off, I'd like to thank the Indian American Muslim Council for inviting me, especially Ajit, and also a special thanks to all of the other speakers whose work on India I very highly respect. In fact, I find myself reading the International Christian Concerns and Evangelical Fellowship of India and Open Doors articles on a daily and weekly basis because they provide the most updated information on India. Although I must say it's, for lack of a better term, regrettable just how many articles we come across with nearly the same story each time. A worship gathering was ambushed by Hindu nationalists, a church was desecrated or completely demolished by radicals, a pastor was falsely accused of and arrested for allegedly eliciting forced religious conversions, or a Christian was beaten to death with metal rods and sticks. It is endless. Even just within the past few weeks as well, there have been a handful of unique incidents. And it's indicative of a broader and deeply seated pattern that we have observed over the past few years. The best way to see the trend really is to look at the statistics, and I will be referring to the Evangelical Fellowship of India's reports that they have released over the past few years. In 2019, there were a total of 366 incidents of violence, harassment, intimidation, or arrest of Christians in India. In 2020, there were 327 cases, and in just the first half of 2021, there have already been 145. Keep in mind that there has been absolutely no decline in the number of incidents amidst the COVID-19 pandemic compared to recent years. Despite lockdown measures designed to keep people inside to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus, Christians were still targeted in violent attacks both in public and, as has been seen more recently, in private. Clandestine house churches and prayer meetings within the safety of the home have increasingly come under fire by Hindu nationalists. There are a few other points I would like to make regarding how COVID-19 has exacerbated the situation of religious persecution in India before I move on to the rest of my statement. As has been observed in other nations as well, religious minorities in India, including Christians and Muslims alike, have been scapegoated as super spreaders of the coronavirus, and they have been the subject of many hate campaigns. Acts of misinformation, posts on social media, politician remarks have used slogans such as Corona Jihad and lockdown cheats to falsely blame Muslims for the worsening COVID situation in India. At the same time, Christian funerals and burials in particular have been interrupted and suspended by Hindu nationalists on accusations that the bodies would, quote unquote, infect the neighborhood. A 2021 survey conducted on 2,100 residents in Uttar Pradesh found that 93% of respondents saw foreigners, namely religious minorities, as the responsible party for India's COVID-19 catastrophe. Just last month, a Christian doctor in Madhya Pradesh was suspended from her job and faced criminal charges for telling her patient that she believes that Jesus heals. We see the same thing happening to Christian COVID aid workers who are being baselessly accused of using their work to deliver assistance as a means to forcefully obtain religious conversions. In January, for example, a Christian and 3 other aid workers were arrested in Uttar Pradesh under false allegations that they were offering money in exchange for religious conversions. It is no coincidence that I've mentioned the states of Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh quite a few times already in my remarks with regards to specific cases. These Indian states, alongside Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and a handful of others, are those which have enacted their own regional legislations, which are ironically called the quote-unquote Freedom of Religion Acts. These laws claim to tackle acts of force and fraudulent religious conversion. In reality, however, they are misused to falsely accuse individuals engaging in peaceful Christian evangelism of using coercion or threat to cause others to change their religion. In essence, these are anti-conversion laws, and they directly contravene Article 25 of the Constitution of India, which guarantees the right to propagate religion, as well as Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which classifies religious conversion as a main component of religious freedom. Under these laws, Christians and other religious minorities can be immediately detained on mere accusations and without even the most rudimentary of investigations, such as is the case of the doctor and the aid workers I previously mentioned. We can see a pattern of coordination and impunity between non-state and state actors. A Hindu nationalist mob will disrupt a prayer meeting or worship gathering. They will then accuse the individuals conducting the meeting of forcefully converting attendants or the entire community to Christianity, and police will arrive and swiftly arrest the accused, all before they release them when no evidence of coerced conversions could be produced. This collusion between state and non-state actors also extends beyond just the implementation of anti-conversion laws. In instances where Hindu nationalist mobs have violently attacked Christian minorities and where evidence of injury and motivation are present and recorded in first information reports, police have been reluctant to register these legitimate cases and take action to punish assailants. In February 2021, a group of Christians was viciously attacked by Hindu extremists and had to spend time in the hospital recovering from their severe injuries. Instead of arresting the attackers, the Jharkhand police filed charges against the 12 attacked Christians and arrested 3. In mid-April, Hindu nationalists brutally attacked 2 Christian men and a Christian woman, but when police arrived, they were able to evade arrest by claiming to authorities that they had not committed a murder or major crime. If one wants to understand how such crimes can be committed with impunity, they need to look no farther than the ideology of the ruling BJP and the statements made by high officials and local authorities in BJP-led states. The BJP touts the Hindutva ideology, which seeks to emphasize the superiority of Hinduism, to define Indian culture according to Hindu values only, and to reject quote unquote foreign religious influence. Christians and Muslims alike have been characterized by politicians as ruthless missionaries or unwanted foreigners, or even traitors to the nation, and they have been the subject of derogatory and dehumanizing remarks. Put simply, this is state-sanctioned and state-abetted religious persecution. The United States, pursuant to the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, has the duty to, quote unquote, condemn violations of religious freedom and to promote and to assist other governments in the promotion of the fundamental right to freedom of religion, end quote. Part of this obligation includes taking measures to oppose FORB violations taking place around the world, measures such as sanctions, suspension of developmental assistance, deferral of cultural exchanges, and more. Also, under the 1998 Earth Act, the State Department is obligated to designate nations whose governments have engaged in or tolerated systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom as countries of particular concern. Designating India as a CPC is the necessary first step in holding the government of India accountable. Not only does it send a clear message to India that we will not stand by and continue to watch these abuses, but it also gives the US government the power to use a wide range of diplomatic and economic tools to make it costly for India to continue on the path of persecution. Yes, it is true that India is the largest democracy in the world and that it is one of the United States' primary strategic partners. However, this should not serve as a justification for overlooking the accelerating persecution of India's religious minorities. Rather, it is the responsibility and duty of the US to hold India accountable to its obligations as a secular democracy and its self-proclaimed standards of pluralism and peaceful coexistence, both of which are increasingly threatened under Modi's regime. We must ensure that our diplomacy and dialogue with India is contingent upon concrete improvements in religious freedom and human rights. And with that, I'd like to conclude my remarks and thank you once again for inviting me to speak on this issue.
Thank you, Sydney, for your remarks and your work on this topic. Our final speaker for this congressional briefing is Matthias Bertula, who is the Advocacy Director for the International Christian Concern. ICC is an interdenominational human rights organization dedicated to assisting Christians throughout the world who are victims of persecution due to the practice of their faith. The organization works to raise public awareness and provide advocacy for persecuted Christians. It also assists the US Congress and executive branch in providing research and evaluation to effectuate policies to safeguard religious freedom worldwide. Since joining ICC in 2018, Matthias leads government relations initiatives in advocating for its stakeholders. So I welcome Matthias, and we hope everybody, I'm sure many of you have heard of him already, but he's a really integral part of the India Working Group, as well as the International Religious Freedom Roundtable.
Well, thank you for that warm introduction, Hannah, and thank you to Ajit and my colleagues at Indian American Muslim Council for hosting this very important event. India is a country that we've been following at ICC very closely over the last several years, especially since Prime Minister Modi came to power. And I'm not sure how much more I can add to the discussion here today, because we've heard an overwhelming amount of evidence about the unfortunate decline in India's domestic religious freedom situation. And while most of the brunt of that decline is being felt by the Muslim community, there's no argument that the Christians are also very much feeling the effects of this decline. It's incredibly saddening considering India's very rich, plural, religiously plural history, with so many different faith groups being active, and seeing this form of militant aggression towards religious minorities has gotten much of the world very concerned, including us, obviously. I think, just to add some content still to the discussion here, and I'll mention a little bit more about the anti-conversion laws that you've been hearing about today. We've done some reporting on this recently that I think will be enlightening to some of the audience. But, religious freedom is something that is guaranteed in all democracies, essentially. There's some form of constitutional provision to this. As you've heard today, India is it's no different to that in India. It's very much protected. But when we see militant ideologies like Hindutva and being propagated by organizations like RSS, the VHP, even in political parties like the BJP, which is Prime Minister Modi's party, of course, that is a note of concern. And when you have legitimate organizations like the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom that does excellent work on reporting these facts, that should raise concerns, especially within India, to take a strong look at themselves on how they are missing the mark in the religious freedom front. And it is incredibly important for the political leadership of that country to condemn these attacks publicly and condemn this decline and take concerted steps and intentional steps to safeguarding India for all Indians, regardless of their religious affiliation. We want to, one point on the you've heard the country of particular concern label being mentioned several times here, which all of us are advocating that India should get it, and that's not because there's some sinister agenda to have a CPC designation for India. It is because the facts commanded, the facts and the realities of everything that you've heard today, there is no other option but for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, to make that recommendation to the State Department. That's not something that any country should desire to want. In fact, it should be a wake-up call to that country, their political leaders, and so on, civil society, and if any person of influence and no influence to start taking this seriously and understand that this is not the direction that you want to be heading into. The United States is a strategic ally to India, and it is the largest and the oldest democracy. India and the United States working together should be safeguarding these values for everyone. That's not to say that the United States is perfect by any means. Of course, we have our issues, but we need to also be willing to receive correction from our friends when there is need for correction. And I think that's true for the US-India relationship here. And that needs to be taken seriously. The one portion I'll still mention to this, which is obviously India and the US share a very special relationship, part of Quad, Japan, Australia, India, so on. There is strategic interest that the United States plays in the region, obviously when it comes in terms to the China containment policy and so on, all of which must be taken very seriously, and the relationship should be guarded, obviously, but that doesn't mean that we cannot call our friends out when they need to be called out, including ourselves. And I think that's important. And, as I've kind of already alluded to before, the CPC status is not something that we want to be, that's not a status that a country should stay on. It is something that should encourage them to make the steps forward away from it. That's why we believe that it's an important tool. We believe that the Biden administration should make that designation. It's already concerning enough that USCIRF feels the need to make this recommendation to the State Department. A recommendation, I'm not speaking on behalf of USCIRF here, but I'm sure is not made lightly. There has to be overwhelming evidence that supports that decision before the recommendation is made. One more thing I'll mention in terms of ICC, we've recently done a specific study on anti-conversion laws that you've all heard about here today. We did the study in the state of Madhya Pradesh that recently passed this law in January of earlier this year in January. And we just monitored the situation in that state on how that law, the passage of the law, had affected the Christian community in Madhya Pradesh. It's extremely worrisome to see the rise amid COVID lockdown conditions, the rise in attacks that we've seen against Christians, against churches, and against different Christian organizations on the ground, and something that should raise alarm with all of us, and only adds to the narrative that we're trying to say here that we need to see some change in India in this. The laws serve as a force of empowerment. They only undergird the climate of impunity when it comes to the attacks that you heard from Sydney today, from Sydney Kachan from Jubilee, shared about some of these atrocious attacks that Christians have faced. It's in the climate of impunity. There's no justification for them, and there's no justice for the perpetrators. But in fact, as you've heard, often it's the Christians that end up getting arrested, either the pastors or the parishioners themselves, as a result of these attacks. It's extremely concerning. Just undergird everything that our colleagues here on the call have said today. Be very happy to share the report that we've published. We'll be doing a deep dive on this report next week. Invite all of you to join us for that. It'll be 11 a.m. Next Wednesday. If you have time, we'd love to have you there. And please look out for that email if there's an email list going out from here today. But just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to share these thoughts. And I hope that this has been an educational, but also a moment where we all kind of get a check in our spirits that we need to be paying closer attention to India and partnering with them, encouraging them to make changes that need to happen. I'll also mention it was encouraging to see that Secretary Blinken's visit to India just this week, I believe he was meeting with officials there today, that this subject was brought up in some sense, according to some news reports, but we hope to see some more public comments coming in, particularly towards religious freedom issues in India. So with that, I want to say thank you, and thank you, Ajit, and thank you, Hannah, for the opportunity to share here today.
Thank you, Matthias, for your remarks and for your commitment to this cause. I would like to take up questions by attendees. I know there's a big concern that we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. We haven't addressed RSS and BJP and a lot of the changes in just the social constructs in the country, and many of us who have roots there, who remember, I remember when I was younger, Amar Akbar Anthony was like this big old movie that everybody used to watch, which was about interfaith friendship, where there was a Hindu, a Christian, and a Muslim, and they, went all over town, getting into shenanigans, and it was beloved. It was a beloved movie. A lot of people watched it, and just when we speak to friends now from who are either have relatives there, friends, family there, or and the change in the country's social dynamics is just so scary for many of us who have roots there. So I'd like, if any of you guys would want to, you can use the Q&A box or the chat box. The Q&A box would probably be easier for me to monitor. Please put your questions there to the speakers. And they have graciously given us their time. So I'd really appreciate direct questions. There was one question in asking, are there direct religious freedom laws? And I'm assuming that this is in India. The people are asking if there is in the Constitution laws that protect religious freedom. And perhaps the Reverend from India.
Yes.
Like to...
Our Constitution itself protects religious freedom. In fact, the Article 25 provides for, not only the practice of your faith, but the propagation of your faith as well. And these provisions were inserted into the Constitution after lengthy Constituent Assembly debates. So India's Constitution provides for religious freedom, but the freedom is not absolute. It is subject to public order and morality, which has not been defined. And at the same time, the Constitution, while giving religious freedom, providing for it, does not prevent states from forming laws that can curtail this particular freedom, because law and order in India is basically state subject. So the Constitution allows for the various state governments to formulate laws that can curtail this freedom if this freedom is having an effect on public morality and social order. So that's why many of the states have these anti-conversion laws, which are ironically titled freedom of religion laws.
Thank you for that, Reverend. The question is from David James. Many of my school classmates from school who were secular are now members of the RSS and VHP. They're still in touch, and they showed me a 1,500 word document to wipe out their minorities. They say that there's no deterrent from the US or the UN, and that is why they may continue. So why can't we delegate the RSS or the BJP or the VHP as a special status that will put them in check? Matthias, do you want to take on this? I believe the question is regarding the status of BJP or VHP as an entity of concern.
Yeah, well, we hope to see that kind of a designation. They absolutely deserve it. I believe it was for some time, I haven't checked this lately, but there was even the CIA raised flags about the RSS on their website or in their archives. That was very concerning. And that's something that we've always pushed for. That's something we hope to see. We hope that more organizations and more activists, and especially more congressional leaders in the US and other political leaders, raise voice on this, especially because of the geostrategic interest that the United States shares with India. Internal domestic stability is a key, and strong institutions within India are key to a safe and stable democracy. These organizations, RSS and the VHP, are not contributing to that stability. They are creating division. They are propagating a hateful ideology that marginalizes and targets religious minorities under false allegations and so on. So absolutely, I hope to see that kind of a designation come by, and something that we advocate for consistently. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has additional comments, but.
Yeah, I'd like to speak on the first part of it, wherein he says many of his schoolmates from school who were so secular are members of the RSS and the VHP. You have to understand that India has gone through a lot of polarization. Partition was the beginning of it, but the wounds were healing, and then 6th December 1992 happened, the demolition of the Babri Masjid. That kind of polarized India like never before. And since then, India has been sharply polarized on religious lines. Hate has become normal. One of the successes of Hindu fundamentalist nationalist organizations is that they have been able to normalize hate. I'll give you an example. When there were a lot of lynchings that happened a couple of years ago in India, just 2 years ago, there were a lot of lynchings happening, and most of the people who were being lynched were Muslims. 4 to 5 Christians were also lynched, but that was in the state of Jharkhand and nearby states. Now, when the first incident of lynching happened, that was Muhammad Akhlaq from Uttar Pradesh. He did not live very far from my house, only about 25 kilometers. And after that, I live in Delhi, so I use Uber, and we have the Uber equivalent of in India called Ola. We use them quite a lot. So I decided to question my cab drivers on the incident that had just happened. Akhlaq was lynched. People came into his house, lynched him, beat up his son as well. And the police came in, and they, instead of taking care of Akhlaq, they went to the refrigerator and took out the meat from there, which was alleged to be beef. And they sent the meat for forensic examination. So I decided to ask my cab drivers what they thought about the incident and what they thought about the killing of Akhlaq, which was grotesque, which was horrible. And to my surprise, 99% of them said it was good that he was killed. These were normal people. These were not fundamentalists. These were normal people making a decent living by driving a cab. That shows you how deep the hatred has seeped into the Indian society. And this is the main reason for worry. Because if people give in to hate, then there's just no stopping. That's why a lot of your friends who were secular now are, if I may use the word, brainwashed. And that's why they were able to show you that document. I don't know what that document is, but I am very worried for the normalizing of hate that has happened in India.
Thank you so much for that reflection, Reverend. I'm going to I think we should wrap it up. Now it's been over an hour. I'm just going to go for that one last question that I believe Mike Wallace, who's also a member of the India Working Group, he wanted to make a comment. So I don't know how to give him permission to speak. So okay, go ahead, Mike.
Well, it is so glad to hear the speakers bring very pertinent points to the talks here. I just want to add that Christianity is indigenous to India. It has been there for 1900 years, since 2nd century. And I don't know how the RSS guys say Christians do not belong in India because their holy place is in Jerusalem. That is a common talk. But Indian Christians are indigenous to India for 1900 years. What else did they want? We have to change that narrative somehow. And also, we're proud of India's pluralistic heritage. For a very long time, India is one of the first countries in the world where several religions still function together cohesively. And unfortunately, since the new administration has been there, all that has been shattered to pieces. And I appreciate all the work done by Indian American Muslim Council and the affiliates with them. And I want to thank every speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'm sorry, I just wanted to give 1 minute to Islam Siddiqui. He's a former ambassador. If you were still on, if we could allow him to, he had his hand raised, I just noticed. Dr. Islam. Dr. Islam Siddiqui, if you're on, if you'd like to ask that question or make a comment, please go ahead. Okay, I think you might have dropped off by now. But definitely, there's another very pertinent comment made by Thomas Palithanam. There's definitely an increasing incidence of violence against Christians in India. At the same time, we notice that it's the poorer sections of Christians who are being attacked, and in places like Kerala, Goa, and Northeast, the attacks are fewer. How do we plan on addressing this intersectionality of poverty and religion? And this is true for Muslims as well and across other parts of the globe. That, if someone would like to take on that, I think that's a very pertinent comment.
I'll try. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can.
I just, again, think that the mere presence of Christians in the country poses a direct challenge to the caste system, which really puts a lot of people in their economic place. And it's highly disruptive. And this is partly why you're seeing a crackdown, from the Indian government. They use religion as a pretext or a cover for their worry about people in the less privileged classes or the underclass, that the Dalits rising up and demanding more rights in terms of working conditions and other kinds of things. So they use Christianity in a way as a veneer to sort of further the caste system and that oppressive economic agenda.
Thank you for that, Peter. We'd like to end this panel here now. Thank you so much to all of you for joining and being a part of this. A recording will be available on, I believe, IAMC's Facebook page, and we'll be uploading a recording on Justice for All's Facebook page as well. And thank you, all of you, for being here, and stay safe at Reverend. We're really worried about the situation there. So, and we're trying our best to do whatever we can here. So thank you all.